Amira walks home after a long double shift at the cafe. Her legs ache, and her back feels like a bag of sand. She looks down, thinking about her to-do list. Buy her mother's medicine, bring the electricity bill so it doesn't get turned off, and buy something for dinner. A few coins jingle mournfully in the pocket of her old jacket. All that's left until payday. She walks down to the metro station, and her gaze automatically picks out a black rectangle from the gray asphalt. She almost passes it by, thinking it's just trash, but something makes her stop and take a closer look. It's not a piece of paper, it's a wallet. Expensive, leather, soft-looking. Amira looks around. People are hurrying about their business. No one is searching for anything on the ground. She bends down and picks it up. The wallet is heavy and stuffed. For a second, she simply holds it in her hand, feeling the high-quality leather beneath her fingers. Conscience and cold calculation clash within her. She slowly unzips the flap. Inside, in the bill compartment, lies a thick wad of cash. Not just a few bills, but a wad. Neat, crisp. Amira, without removing it, quickly flicks her thumb over the amount. Her heart begins to beat faster. This is enough. For everything. For medicine, for debts, for a few months of peace. She freezes in place, clutching someone else's well-being in her palm, and her own desperate situation. She steps aside, to the wall of the building, shielding herself from the stream of people. Her fingers, trembling slightly with excitement, begin to sort through the contents. Besides the money, there are several plastic cards with no names, only numbers. No driver's license, no photos, and then, in the narrowest compartment, her fingers encounter something hard and smooth. She pulls out an ordinary white business card. The paper is thick, expensive. There is nothing on it except a name, embossed in strict black font, Min June, and below, an address. Not just a street and a building, but the name of a tower in the city's most expensive business district and a floor number, 50th. The name means nothing to her, but the address, this tower. She sees its silhouette in the distance every day on her way to work. It's a place where people like her don't go. A place of glass, steel, and quiet, unquestioned power. A person who works on the 50th floor and carries that much money in her wallet is clearly not an ordinary office worker. The business card looks like a pass to another world, minimalist, faceless, and therefore all the more impressive. Amira glances between the wad of cash and this modest white card. The money screams of opportunity. The business card is silent, but its silence seems even louder. She puts the card back and clutches the wallet tightly in her fist, as if afraid it will disappear. Amira sits the entire subway ride home, staring at one spot, her wallet tucked deep into her bag. Money burns in her mind. She imagines her mother's face when she tells her she's found a good clinic. She imagines paying off those endless bills that haunt her, freeing herself from the crushing weight of debt. She even allows herself a momentary dream, a small studio of her own, where she can paint in peace, maybe even enroll in a class. All this is in her bag. She just needs to not go to that address tomorrow. Just keep quiet. But then another image emerges. The face of a stranger, Min Jun. Perhaps he won't notice the loss. Or he will. But it's a small thing for him. But this isn't her money. Her entire upbringing, her entire mother, who even when she was sick, always said, "Honor is all you have when you have nothing else," rises up inside. Yes, she's desperate. Yes, she's on the edge. But if she does this, if she appropriates this money, she'll save one thing, material things, and kill another, herself, the one who can look herself in the eye. Her hands will shake, not from excitement, but from shame every time she buys her mother medicine. She gets off at her stop and walks through the dark courtyard to her old house. The decision comes not like thunder, but as a quiet, firm understanding. It is heavy as a stone. She goes into her room, puts her bag on the table, and takes out her wallet. She places it in front of her. Tomorrow, she will not go to work. She will go to this address. She will return the wallet, because if she doesn't, no amount of money will take away from her soul the feeling that she stole not only from a stranger, but from herself as well. She sighs deeply. Tomorrow will be a hard day. The next morning begins with a heavy feeling in her chest. Amira puts on her best dress, simple, dark blue, without embellishments. She wants to look put together, even though she's shaking inside. She clutches her purse tightly in her hand, like a talisman. The journey to the area takes over an hour. First, the stuffy metro, then a transfer to a nearly empty, too-clean train that travels above ground. Outside the window, the landscape gradually changes. Faded billboards and old buildings disappear, replaced by the mirrored facades of skyscrapers, like giant crystals. Even the air seems different here, cool, filtered, devoid of the scent of the streets. She gets off at the right station and finds the tower on the map. The Silver Peak building truly does resemble a sharp blade piercing the sky. It's not just tall, it's austere and silent. Huge slabs of polished dark stone at the base give give way to endless ribbons of mirrored glass. The people entering and exiting the revolving doors are dressed in impeccable suits, their faces focused, their steps quick. Amira pauses for a moment by the fountain in front of the entrance, feeling tiny and out of place. She takes a deep breath, adjusts her bag on her shoulder, and heads toward the imposing bronze doors. Silence reigns inside, broken only by the soft hum of the systems and the quiet tread of footsteps on the marble floor. The air smells of expensive wood and cold. Directly opposite the entrance, a security guard sits behind a wide, dark wood counter. He's not wearing a regular uniform, but a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. His posture is upright, and his gaze is calm and appraising. His eyes are fixed on Amira from the moment she steps through the door. There's no rudeness in them, only a neutral wariness that says more clearly than a shout, "You don't belong here." Amira approaches the counter, her throat dry. "Hello," she says, her voice quieter than she intended. "I need to see Min Jun on the 50th floor." The guard slowly looks up at her, his expression unchanging. "Do you have an appointment?" His voice is low, even, emotionless. "No, but I need to return something to him. I have his thing. Leave it here." "I'll pass it on," comes the automatic response. Amira shakes her head. No, she won't just hand over her wallet to a broker. Something almost imperceptible changes on his face, not an expression, but a tension around his eyes, the corner of his mouth. It's not a smile, but an instant recognition. He's seen this card before and knows what it means. He nods slowly. "One moment," he says, his tone changing, still formal, but now with a hint of attentiveness. He turns, picks up the intercom, and, taking a half step away, says something very quietly, almost a whisper. Then he hangs up and turns to her. "You will be shown to the elevators on the right, the one with the steel doors." He nods toward a narrow corridor. Amira follows it, feeling the guard's gaze follow her. The elevators here are varied. Some are bright, mirrored, and people fuss over them, but the one the guard pointed to stands apart. Its doors are matte metal, without a single sign or button on the outside. Nearby, almost invisible in the shadows, stands another man in the same formal suit. He silently appraises her, and Amira shows him her business card again. The man nods, takes a flat plastic keycard from his pocket, and swipes it. Across a nearly invisible panel, the matte doors slide silently open. Inside the elevator, there are no mirrors, no music, no floor button panel, only soft, matte lighting, walls covered in dark fabric, and a feeling of absolute silence. The doors close silently. The movement begins so smoothly that Amira at first only feels a slight pressure in her ears. There is no familiar hum and grinding, only the barely perceptible whisper of the mechanisms. A number lights up on the wall and begins to change quickly, inexorably. 10, 20, 30. Amira watches the numbers grow. She is cut off from the world in the silent, upward-moving box. The surrounding luxury of the main lobby has been replaced by this sterile, isolated capsule. She thinks about the person she is about to meet, about how she is doing the right thing. But this rightness now seems so fragile and insignificant compared to the silent power of this building and this rapid ascent into the sky. The number reaches 50. The elevator comes to a soft stop. The doors slide silently open, revealing a new, unknown world. Amira is confronted with not just an office, but an entire space that momentarily takes her breath away. It's a vast room, the floor covered in a thick gray carpet that muffles every step. To the left is a long table of dark, almost black wood, adorned only with a thin laptop and a stack of neat papers. To the right is a conference area with a low sofa and a light stone coffee table. But the main thing is the wall, or rather, the lack thereof. The entire far side of the room, from floor to ceiling, is a continuous window, a panorama of the entire city spread out below like a glittering toy. From this height, the noise of the streets is muted, leaving only silence and this silent, overwhelming grandeur. A man sits at the table, Min Jun. He doesn't look out the window. He looks at her. He doesn't look like a gangster from the movies. He wears a perfectly tailored dark gray jacket over a black turtleneck, not a hint of flashy luxury. He looks about 40, his features calm and distinct, his hair short and neatly trimmed. He doesn't smile. His attention is completely focused on the newcomer, scrutinizing, without a hint of preemptive friendliness or curiosity. In this silence, Amira feels her every movement, every breath, take on significance. She stands in the threshold, a small figure in a simple blue dress, against the backdrop of a gigantic cityscape. She forces herself to take a step forward, then another. Her footsteps are silent in this carpeted kingdom. The distance to the table seems endless. Min Jun doesn't rise, doesn't say a word. He simply waits, his hands resting on the table in front of him, his fingers clasped calmly. That silent, expectant gaze is stronger than any question. Amir's throat goes dry. All the words she'd prepared, polite, explanatory, evaporate. Any speech now seems superfluous, out of place in this silence. She stops a few steps from the table, hesitating to approach. Without a word, she opens her bag, takes out a black leather wallet, and simply hands it to him. Her hand doesn't shake, but she's completely composed. She looks him straight in the eye, trying not to look away. Her gesture speaks louder than any words. This is yours. I brought it. Min-jun slowly lowers his gaze to the wallet in her hand, then raises it back to her face. His attention is now focused not on the missing item, but on her. He studies her, her simple dress, the honest, intense expression in her eyes, the determination in her posture. There's no threat in his gaze, but an intense, almost physical weight of assessment. He sees more than just the girl who returned the wallet. He sees her action, her journey here, her inner struggle, visible in every tense muscle. A few seconds pass, which feel like minutes. Finally, just as slowly and smoothly, he extends his hand and takes the wallet. His fingers brush her palm for a moment, a dry, cool touch. The wallet rests on the dark wood of the table in front of him. Amira lowers her hand, feeling a strange emptiness. Now it's his again. Min-jun slowly unzips the flap. His movements are economical, unfussy. He peers inside. His gaze skims the stack of bills. He doesn't count them, simply registers their presence. Then he moves them to the side, takes out his plastic cards, quickly checking their number, and finds that same white business card in the narrow compartment. He stares at it for a second, and the corner of his mouth twitches a millimeter, something like a ghostly, fleeting recognition, or a thought he doesn't voice. The entire process takes no more than 20 seconds. His face is still inscrutable, but a new depth has appeared in his eyes. Not gratitude yet, but rather a reassessment of his original assessment. He didn't expect it to be like this, that she would come, and that everything would be returned in full, without any attempts at bargaining or justification. He nods slowly, almost imperceptibly. It's not a nod of gratitude, it's a nod of acknowledgement. The fact is noted. And now, after this quiet check, something new begins. The silence in the office deepened after the nod. Amira didn't know what to do next. Should she expect gratitude? Just turn around and leave? You saw the business card. You saw the money, he said, phrasing it as a statement rather than a question. His gaze was fixed on her face, catching the slightest reaction. You know where you are. Why did you bring the wallet here? He paused briefly, letting the words sink in, and then asked the main question that had been hanging in the air since she appeared. Why? Didn't you just keep it all for yourself? The question sounded so simple, almost businesslike. There was no test or trick in it, only a desire to understand the motive. He struck Amira right at the heart of her struggle from yesterday. He wasn't asking about her actions, but about her inner choice, about the very fork in the road she stood at. And he asked, knowing who he was, a man with so much power and money that the loss of even a large sum probably meant nothing to him. So, he was asking why, in her desperate situation, she had acted foolishly, or, in his view, honestly. Amira froze. She had expected everything, but not this direct, surgically precise question. She looked into his eyes again. She saw in them not condemnation, but expectation, and this allowed her to find the strength to answer just as directly, without embellishment. She didn't bother to concoct a beautiful speech about morality. Because I needed the money. I really needed it, she began quietly, her voice louder than she'd intended in the quiet office. I'm in debt. My mother is sick. She needs treatment. She paused briefly, swallowing the lump in her throat. Admitting her vulnerability to this man was unbearably difficult, but she continued. I thought about it the whole way here. I almost decided to leave them. She saw something flicker in his eyes. Not surprise, but rather recognition of her frankness. It gave her courage. But if I did that, Amira straightened her back, I'd wake up every morning thinking I was a thief, that Mom's medicine was bought with someone else's money, taken without asking. My mother, she wouldn't have approved of that. Never. She looked past him, into the glittering distance outside the window, gathering her last words. Money will solve problems, but it won't restore self-respect. And without it, everything else is meaningless. Honor, I guess. It's more precious. When there's nothing else, she finished and looked down, suddenly feeling tired and naked. She'd spilled everything. Now it was his turn. Min-jun was silent for several long seconds. He looked at her, and his impenetrable expression began to change. The ice of analytical detachment melted, giving way to something deeper, almost respectful. The corners of his eyes softened slightly, and then he smiled. It wasn't a full smile, but a subtle, barely perceptible shift in his features, but it completely transformed him. There was warmth, understanding, and a certain firm determination in it. "Thank you," he said simply, and that "thank you" me carried more weight than any grand words. Then he pushed back his chair, stood up, and walked not to the window, but to the wall to the left of the desk, where a nearly invisible gap existed among the dark wood panels. He placed his palm on the right spot, heard a soft click, and part of the panel slid aside, revealing a built-in safe. Inside lay stacks of documents and folders, and several neat piles of bills. Min-jun didn't try to hide anything. He took one of the stacks, closed the safe, and returned to the table. He sat down, placed the bills in front of him, and began counting them out. Slowly, the bills were large, the same denomination as those in his wallet. He counted silently, his fingers moving quickly and confidently. Amira, watching in fascination, tried to understand what was happening. He counted out one stack, which seemed to her to be equal to the amount in the wallet, set it aside, and continued counting. A second, a third, a 10th. He collected 10 identical, neat stacks and carefully placed them together. Then he took a simple envelope made of thick brown paper from a desk drawer, put all the money in it, sealed it, and handed it across the desk to Amira. "Your honor is valuable," he said, his voice soft. Again, but firm. "This is my assessment, 10 times higher. This is not payment. It is recognition, and an investment in a man who does not lose himself, even when it seems there is nothing to lose." Amira recoiled as if the envelope were red hot. Her eyes widened, darting from his calm face to the thick brown paper package. "No," she said sharply, almost frightened. "No, I can't accept this. I brought yours, not to collect payment," Min-jun finished softly for her. He placed the envelope on the edge of the table, exactly in the middle between them. "This is not a return fee. I already received the wallet. This is separate." "But this is a fortune. For what?" Her voice wavered. Her head refused to comprehend the scale of his gesture. Tenfold. It changed everything again. But now it seemed unfair. A stunning favor. "You said it yourself. Honor is more precious when there is nothing else," he reminded her, his gaze becoming piercing. "In my world, honesty, especially this kind, selfless, is rarer than diamonds. It cannot be bought, but it can be recognized. You can nurture the soil in which it grows." He gently nudged the envelope toward her. "You didn't take what was yours. I give what was mine. It's my choice. Accepting it is now your choice." He didn't press. He simply explained, like an axiom. His insistence was quiet, but absolute, like the walls of this building. Amira felt her resistance, built on pride and principle, begin to crack. She looked at the envelope. It was a ticket to another life, a ticket she hadn't bought or stolen. Acceptance of an incredible gift that lifted a weight from her soul, not the weight of honor, but the weight of constant, suffocating anxiety. Slowly, as if resisting an invisible current, she raised her hand. Her fingers touched the rough paper. She took the envelope. It was heavy, incredibly weighty in her palm. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice broke. A lump formed in her throat, and her eyes instantly filled with moisture. These were not tears of grief or weakness. These were powerful, all-crushing relief. It rolled over her in a wave, washing away months, perhaps even years, of fear, humiliating calculations, sleepless nights of contemplation. She could look him in the eyes, and her gaze now held not only gratitude, but also a silent question. "Why me?" Min-jun saw those tears, and saw in them not weakness, but dignity. He nodded again, more clearly. The mission was complete. The next morning, the world was unchanged. The sun shone. Her room was the same, but on the nightstand next to her bed lay that same brown envelope. Amira acted methodically, as if afraid it was a dream. First, her phone. She opened Idat'in bank app, where the red numbers for overdue loans hung. Her fingers, trembling slightly, entered amount after amount. Each time a payment was confirmed, a green checkmark appeared on the screen, and the words, "debt paid." She watched, holding her breath. 1, 2, 5, 10. The red faded, replaced by a neutral gray or a soothing green. This wasn't just a transfer of money, it was an erasure. An erasure of the constant background noise of her life. Then she sat down at her old laptop and found the utility company websites. Electricity, gas, water, internet. The debts had been piling up for months. She paid it all at once, including future months in advance. Each click of the mouse felt like a sigh of relief. She printed out the receipts and neatly filed them away. No more reminder letters, no more calls from debt collectors, no more embarrassment in front of her neighbors when she had to ask for an extension. At some point, she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. There was no euphoria in the silence of the room. There was peace. A deep, all-pervading peace. The debts were paid. She still had a lot left in her hands, but the the first, heaviest stone had been lifted, she opened her eyes and looked at the photo of her mother on the table. The most important part was yet to come. Amira spent the next few days researching rather than relaxing. She sat at her laptop, immersed in a world of medical terminology, reviews, and clinic ratings. Previously, she'd searched for cheapest and installment plans. Now her criteria had shifted. She was looking for the best specialist, the most modern equipment, and a comprehensive rehabilitation program. She called, asked clear questions, and scheduled consultations. The world of high-quality medicine, which had once seemed an impenetrable fortress, now opened its doors to her. All she had to do was name the required amount. She chose a private clinic on the outskirts of the city, more like a sanatorium, with a park and bright rooms. The consultation with the head physician lasted over an hour. The doctor, an elderly woman with intelligent, kind eyes, outlined a detailed plan, not just stopping the exacerbation, but a full course of treatment with physiotherapy, remedial gymnastics, and observation by several specialists. Amira listened, nodding, and a warm, unfamiliar feeling spread through her chest. Not even hope, but confidence. Confidence that now everything would be right. At the clinic's cashier, when they told her the total cost of the course, she simply pulled out her bank card and transferred some of the money from the envelope, a small amount. The click of the terminal, a paper receipt in her hands. She returned to the doctor's office and her mother, who sat there, awkwardly fiddling with her bag. "It's all settled, Mom," Amira said, her voice firm and calm. "You're staying here for a month. For the full course." Her mother's face, exhausted by pain and worries, expressed first bewilderment, then alarm. "Amira, honey, it costs. It's all paid for." Amira interrupted her gently, but in a way that left no doubt. She took her mother's hand and looked her in the eyes. "You just need to get treatment. Everything else is my concern." Tears glistened in this mother's eyes, but these were tears of a different kind. Tears of relief from the burden she had silently borne for so long, trying not to burden her daughter. She put the principal into a savings account so it would earn at least a small but steady interest. She put a small portion aside for living expenses. For the first time in many years, she had something she'd never had before. A break. Time that wasn't plundered minute by minute between work, the hospital, and counting pennies. The first thing she did was write a letter of resignation at the cafe. Not because the job was bad, but because it was a symbol of survival. Her passport and work record book were returned to her, and as she walked out the familiar door for the last time, she felt invisible shackles lift from her shoulders. She came home to this quiet, now empty apartment. Her mother was in the hospital, sat on the floor in the middle of the living room, and simply remained silent. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was filled with possibility. She didn't make grand plans. She started small. She enrolled in a digital design course she'd long since found online. She bought herself a new, good laptop for school. She cleared out the piles of old things in her closet, throwing out everything that reminded her of poverty and despair. She bought herself one beautiful houseplant, a ficus. It was a new beginning, not a takeoff, but a solid, calm foundation upon which she could slowly and surely build. Several months passed. Life settled into a new, slow, and surprisingly stable rhythm. Amira studied. While studying wasn't easy, it was a challenge that brought pleasure, not the stress of unfulfilled duties. She could afford to focus on her assignments without worrying about having to get up at 5 in the morning for a shift the next day. Mom returned from the clinic, a different person. Not completely healthy, the illness was chronic, but stronger, with color in her cheeks and a sparkle in her eyes. The pain subsided, replaced by a manageable state. Together, they developed a new routine, proper nutrition, walks, and treatments that Amira could now maintain without strain. Their evenings became quiet and peaceful. Mom read or watched a TV series. Amira did homework on her laptop. Sometimes they simply sat silently on the balcony, watching the sunset. The former conversations, full of anxious whispers about money and health, were replaced by ordinary, everyday ones, discussing a book, weekend plans, or a funny video online. Amira sometimes caught herself thinking that an entire day would pass without her once feeling that clenching, cold fear in her chest. The fear of tomorrow. It was gone. A simple, clear, everyday life had taken its place. A life that contained not only struggle, but also quiet growth, simple joy, and long-awaited peace. And this peace was the most precious gift of all. Amira's quiet, measured rhythm of life was disrupted on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. She was sitting at her laptop, immersed in a new digital design lesson, when an unfamiliar number lit up her phone screen. Not just unfamiliar, it looked expensive. A neat, elegant combination of numbers that immediately hinted at status. Amira frowned. Debt collectors? But there were no more debts. Maybe the clinic? No, her mother was fine. She swiped her finger across the screen with some hesitation. Hello? Hello? Is this Amira? A male voice asked. It was polite even, and completely emotionless, as if he were reciting a prepared message. Yes, it's me. Who's calling? My name is Kim. I'm Mr. Min Jun's assistant. There was a slight pause on the line, as if giving her time to process this information. Amira froze, instinctively clutching the phone in her hand. The world of her quiet, safe apartment seemed to shake, and memories poured through the crack. The mirrored tower, the silent elevator, Min Jun's heavy gaze. Mr. Min Jun instructed me to contact you. Amira was silent, unable to find the words. The assistant, without waiting for a response, continued in the same even, courteous tone. Mr. Min Jun would like to personally express his gratitude for your gesture. He feels that his previous thanks were too formal and did not properly show respect. The voice on the phone paused again, microscopically. He asked me to tell you that your honesty deserves more than an envelope. He would like to invite you to dinner as his guest. Amira heard her own heartbeat increase. Dinner? With him? That's not necessary, she finally managed. He's already been very generous. I'm very grateful. Everything is fine. Mr. Min Jun insists, Kim replied gently, but leaving no room for objection. He understands that this may raise questions. He assures you that this is just a dinner, as a sign of respect. Nothing more. He suggests meeting tomorrow at 7 o'clock in the evening at the Moon Garden restaurant. A car will be sent for you, if that's convenient. There was no pressure in his words, only impeccable politeness behind which one could sense the iron will of the one giving the order. It wasn't a request, but an announcement of a decision made at the top. After the call ended, and Amira muttered automatically, "Okay, I'll think about it," and Kim's assistant said a polite goodbye. A resounding silence fell over the room. She put the phone down as if it had become hot. Anxiety, similar to the one she'd felt at the foot of the tower, gripped her chest again. Why was he doing this? Months had passed. He'd said everything he wanted back then. He'd given her everything she needed, and more. Why lunch now? Anxious thoughts raced through her mind. What if he'd changed his mind? What if this meeting was a test, or something worse? But then she remembered his look that day. Not cruel, but appraising. And finally, respectful. His gesture had been generous, unconditional. If he'd wanted to harm her, he would have had the opportunity sooner. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out onto her new, peaceful courtyard. Her life had finally taken shape. She was studying. Her mother was safe. Meeting Min Jun felt like an invasion from another, too powerful and incomprehensible world. A world where people like him dictated the rules. She was afraid of this power, afraid of feeling small and out of place again. But on the other hand, she also felt the rudeness of his refusal. He, whoever he was, had shown her respect. He had saved her from the brink. To refuse a simple meal after thanking him for everything he had done seemed monstrously ingratitude. It would be cowardly, and she didn't want to be cowardly. She returned to her laptop and closed the lesson. She sighed. Fear and duty warred within her. Finally, she opened the text message from an unfamiliar number, which listed the address of the moonlit garden. She typed a short reply. Okay, 7, thanks, Amira. She didn't request a car. She would go herself. It would be calmer that way. That way, she would have at least some illusion of control over the situation. The doubts hadn't gone away. They had merely subsided, replaced by a nervous, wary anticipation. Tomorrow was no longer just a day again. The Moon Garden wasn't the posh place Amira had imagined. It was a small, cozy restaurant in the Old Quarter, tucked away in a courtyard. Dark brick walls, wooden tables, dim lamplight under rice paper shades, and quiet, melancholy music played. There were no mirrored ceilings or guards at the door. The place smelled of juniper, sandalwood, and something delicious simmering in the kitchen. She was greeted by a middle-aged, courteous maitre d' who, without asking her name, led her to a table in an alcove by the wall at the back of the room. Min Jun was already seated there. Once again, he didn't live up to expectations. He wasn't wearing a formal suit, but a dark cashmere jumper and simple trousers. He stood as she approached and gestured for her to sit. There were no papers or telephones on the table, only a candle in a glass tumbler and a small vase with a living branch. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice quieter and warmer in this setting. He didn't resemble the tower's owner. He looked simply like a well-dressed, pleasant man waiting for his companion. He poured her water from a decanter himself, offered the menu, and recommended several dishes that, he said, were especially well prepared there. His manner was impeccably gallant, but without a hint of familiarity or arrogant condescension. He created an island of calm normality around them, and Amira, unexpectedly, felt the lump of anxiety in her chest begin to dissipate little by little. Their life had changed. He listened attentively, nodding, asking clarifying questions, not as a tester, but as a genuinely interested person. "And you?" she asked unexpectedly when the pause lengthened. What do you do? He smiled slightly, as if anticipating the question. I manage the family business. Yes. Various assets. Boring things, he answered evasively, but gently. And then he changed the subject. And what are you doing now, besides taking care of your mother? And she told him, at first hesitantly, then more animatedly, about design courses, about how unexpectedly interesting it had become to understand programs, about her first. It takes courage to start from scratch in a new endeavor, he remarked when she fell silent, embarrassed by her sudden eloquence. I have the confidence to try now, she said honestly, looking at him. Thanks to you. Many have the confidence, he retorted. But the courage to change your life? No, that's yours. And that's much more valuable. The conversation flowed easily, without strain. They talked about books. It turned out they both loved historical fiction, about music, about how the city had changed in recent years. He didn't come across as a know-it-all, but rather as an intelligent conversationalist who knew how to listen. Amira caught herself thinking she'd forgotten who he was and where he came from. He was simply an interesting person in front of her. Dinner came to an end. They declined dessert, ordering simple herbal tea. A comfortable silence fell between them. The candle on the table burned low, casting warm shadows on his sculpted, calm face. And then Min-jun put his cup down and looked at her with a direct, open gaze. Amira, he said her name as if weighing it. This evening has been very pleasant for me, more than I expected. She nodded, unsure of what to say, feeling her pulse quicken. I rarely meet people with whom I can speak simply, without calculation, without masks, he continued. His voice was serious. And I would like to invite you to continue our acquaintance, to date, to get to know each other better, not as benefactor and recipient of help, but simply as man and woman. He paused, letting what he said sink in. There was no pressure in his offer, no condescension. It was a clear, respectful request. But behind those words lay a whole universe of differences. His world of glass towers and quiet, ruthless decisions, and hers, a newly found, fragile world of peace and study. He was offering to erase this boundary, at least for the time of their meetings. His eyes gleamed not only with hope, but also with a rare uncertainty. What if she refused? He had achieved much in life, but this, a simple, mutual human interest, purged of self-interest, was apparently the hardest to achieve. He waited for her answer, and in this restaurant silence, something very important for both of them was being decided. June's words hung in the air, filled with the scent of tea and the warmth of the dying candle. Amira felt the blood rush to her cheeks. His offer was clear, honest, and incredibly flattering, but it also caused a slight panic inside her. She looked at her hands, clasped around the warm cup, then looked up at him with an embarrassed, apologetic gaze. A small, awkward smile touched her lips. Min-jun, she began quietly, choosing her words carefully. It's a great honor for me, and this evening has been truly wonderful. But, she paused briefly, gathering her courage. I have someone. His name is Leon. We've only been dating for a short time, but it's something. She said it as if apologizing, and immediately felt a strange relief mixed with annoyance. Relief, because she'd spoken the truth, not allowed the situation to descend into a dead end of omissions. Annoyance, because something in his eyes, just for a moment, changed, not dimmed, but rather refocused. She imagined Leon, the kind, predictable, safe architect with whom everything was simple and understandable, and this powerful, complex man before her who was inviting her into a world full of different rules. Min-jun didn't look away. He didn't frown or show irritation. On the contrary, he bowed his head slightly, as if taking in some important information. His expression wasn't one of defeat, but rather one of respectful interest, as if he were looking at a worthy obstacle. Leon, he said, as if tasting the name. So he's already come to appreciate your honesty and strength. An intelligent man. His answer was so unexpected and noble that Amira was momentarily taken aback. There wasn't a hint of sarcasm or disdain. I appreciate your directness, Amira, he continued, his voice taking on that firm, calm tone again. That's another quality that's becoming rare these days. You said no when you could have lied or exploited the situation. That says a lot. He took a sip of his tea, his movements still measured. You said you weren't dating for long. And I, as you understand, am a man accustomed to achieving goals if they're worth it. And I believe in fair competition. He looked at her, and a spark of something alive, almost competitive, flashed in his eyes. I'm not backing down just because another player has appeared on the field. On the contrary, this means I have a chance to win your heart by showing that I can offer more than just gratitude. If, of course, you don't mind me trying. He didn't. He demand an answer right away. He was simply stating his intentions, leaving the choice up to her. It wasn't pressure, but a declaration, and that declaration showed more respect for her and her feelings than any attempt to immediately change her mind. The following days became difficult for Amira. Unusual, Min-jun didn't pester her with calls. He didn't try to force his way into her life. He started small, but incredibly precise. On the third day, after dinner, a modest yet exquisite bouquet was delivered to her door. Not roses, but white peonies and eucalyptus sprigs, wrapped in rough craft paper. Attached was a laconic card. "I hope your day is as bright as these flowers, MD." A week later, an invitation arrived, not to a restaurant, but to a private exhibition of contemporary Korean calligraphy at a private museum. The invitation read, "I thought you, as a budding designer, might be interested in seeing this harmony of lines. I'll be there if you decide to stop by." Amira went, partly out of curiosity, partly out of politeness. He was there, but he didn't pester her. They looked at the works together. He quietly commented on the history of certain styles, and once again the conversation flowed easily about beauty, far from any hint of pressure. Then there were the tickets to the Philharmonic for chamber music. He remembered her mentioning a love of the violin, delivered with her favorite caramel latte on a day when she'd been stuck working on a project. It was as if he were building a space of attention around her, one that didn't press, but surrounded her. He studied her interests and responded to them, not with words, but with actions. It wasn't ostentatious chic. These were meaningful, subtle gestures that said, "I see you. I remember what's important to you, and I'm willing to wait." This made Amira think. Leon was sweet, reliable, but their relationship had, and against her will, she found herself waiting for these small signs of attention, starting to compare, starting to ponder. Leon doesn't immediately notice this quiet competition. He's an architect, a man of plans, blueprints, and clear lines. His courtship of Amira was the same, predictable, reliable, structured according to a clear plan. Every Saturday, he takes her to dinner at good, but not pretentious, restaurants that he finds in his city guide. He talks about his projects, speaks warmly of his family, inquires about her progress in her courses. He's kind, he's stable. With him, she feels safe and secure. When he gives her flowers, they're always roses from the nearest flower stand, and he's a little embarrassed as he hands them over. Leon is the warm, stable presence Amira so lacked before. And he doesn't give up either. Sensing perhaps some subtle change in her, he becomes more attentive, calls more often, suggests going out of town for the weekend. He operates within the confines of his own world, a world of common sense and understandable romantic gestures, unaware that his rival is playing a completely different game, with different rules and unlimited resources. A few more weeks pass. Amira lives in a strange rhythm between two worlds. On one side is Leon, with his simple, sincere care. On the other is Min-jun, whose presence is felt not in everyday conversations, but in those precise, timely, and deeply personal gestures of attention that speak to his incredible ability to listen and remember. And one evening, after a particularly sweet but slightly boring date with Leon, where they spent the entire evening discussing the merits of various building materials, Amira sits alone by the window with a cup of tea. She doesn't think about gestures or gifts. She thinks about the essence. Leon is like a cozy, well-designed house. Everything is in its place, safe and understandable, but there is no mystery, no challenge that makes you grow. Min-jun is an entire unexplored continent. His strength is not brute but internal, deep as the ocean. His reliability is of a different kind, not the reliability of predictability, but the iron reliability of a man who, once he gives his word, will keep it under any circumstances. He saw her at the bottom and did not turn away. He offered his hand without asking for anything in return. And now he offers himself patiently and persistently, respecting her boundaries and her choice. She catches herself thinking that she is waiting not for Leon's call, but for Min-jun's next move, that his silent confidence draws her more powerfully than any words. Her heart, not her mind, has already made a choice. She reaches for this strength, this depth, this strange, unshakable reliability hidden behind a calm smile. She fears this choice because it leads into the unknown, but she can no longer ignore it. She arranges to meet Leon at the very same cafe where they first met. She arrives early and sits, cupping her hands over her teacup, choosing her words carefully. Leon arrives with a smile and a small bouquet of violets. Seeing her serious face, his smile fades. "Leon," Amira begins, looking him straight in the eye, "you're a wonderful person. Kind, bright, reliable. These weeks have been so important to me. But," he asks quietly, "Boy, already understanding. But my heart, it chose someone else, and it would be unfair to you to pretend otherwise." She doesn't launch into long justifications, doesn't compare them. She simply tells the truth, like back then, in Min-jun's office. Leon silently looks at the flowers on the table, then nods slowly. There's no anger on his face, but sadness and understanding. Is this the person with the story? The one who helped you? He guesses. He wasn't blind. He noticed a slight detachment. Yes, Amira answers honestly. It's not out of gratitude. It's difficult to explain. And it's not necessary, Leon interrupts her gently. He takes a deep breath and exhales. As an architect, I understand when a project doesn't fit the foundation, no matter how much you like the facade. He tries to smile, and it comes out sadly, but dignified. I wish you happiness. Sincerely. He stands, leaving the violets on the table. He leans over and briefly places his hand on her shoulder. A parting warm gesture. Then he turns and walks away, keeping his back straight. Amira sits, watching him go, her heart full of gratitude and a slight sadness, but also with immense relief. The path ahead was clear. Their first real date was unpretentious. Mint June suggested a simple stroll through the old botanical garden on the outskirts of town. He picked her up by car, not in a chauffeured black limousine, but in his own discreet dark car. He got out to open the door for her. A simple, natural gesture. The weather was clear, with a light, cool breeze. They walked along gravel paths between tall cedars and beds of late asters. At first, they talked about trivial matters, the smell of pine needles after rain, a funny squirrel dropping a pine cone. Then the conversation naturally deepened. Amira told me how she loved to draw trees as a child, and Min Jun recalled how his grandfather taught him to distinguish tree species by their bark and texture. They laughed over their equally unsuccessful attempts at cooking complex dishes using recipes from the internet. There was no tension from their first encounters. No burden of his status or her gratitude. There was simply them, a man and a woman, enjoying each other's company. He listened to her with such attention, as if every word mattered. And he spoke to her, not about business or money, but about his preferences, thoughts, and small memories. He smiled more often, and this smile transformed his stern face, making him look younger and more approachable. Amira caught herself laughing freely, heartily, and that her hand, when it accidentally touched his, didn't pull away, but found his palm. Their fingers intertwined naturally and warmly, as if that's how it was meant to be. After that walk, Min Jun began to gradually, in measured doses, open the door to his universe. But he did so with surprising sensitivity. It wasn't a barrage of luxury or an attempt to dazzle. Rather, he shared with her what he considered beautiful and worthwhile. He invited her to a private musical evening, not to a concert hall, but to an old mansion, where a quartet performed chamber music in a high-ceilinged living room. The audience was small, quiet, and attentive. He sat nearby, occasionally quietly explaining the story behind the piece. It was a world of concentrated, almost intellectual beauty, a world of silence and order. His world was not flashy, but strict and measured, where every detail, from the arrangement of furniture in his country house to the choice of food, was thoughtful and carried meaning and harmony. Amira, a designer at heart, began to appreciate this. She saw not a display of wealth, but a deep respect for quality, form, and substance. He didn't drag her into his life by force. He patiently showed her, waiting to see if she liked it. After a while, Amira realized she wanted her mother to see him, not as a benefactor, but as a person. She was nervous, but Min Jun took it completely seriously. He came not with expensive gifts, but with a beautiful basket of seasonal fruit and an exquisite but not overbearing tea, which he learned her mother loved. The evening passed in their small living room. Min Jun was reserved and respectful. He spoke to Amira's mother, not condescendingly, but as an equal, asking about her health, about her previous work as a teacher, and listening attentively to her stories. He wasn't trying to impress. He was simply himself, calm, attentive, a little reserved, but sincere. After he left, Mom was silent for a long time, making evening tea. Then she looked at Amira, who stood frozen in anticipation. A strong man, Mom said quietly. And lonely, I feel it, behind all these walls and order. And you, aren't you afraid? His world, Amira began. His world is his world, Mom interrupted wisely. I don't look at the world, but at how it looks at you. She smiled, placing her hand on her daughter's. When he listened to you talk about your projects, there was respect in his eyes. Not condescension, not just interest, respect. For a woman, this is sometimes more important than any passion. He sees you as an individual, Amira, and he was willing to wait. That says a lot. Mom's approval, based not on external attributes, but on an intuitive understanding of the essence of a person, became for Amira's last, most important sign. Now her heart and her home were at peace. With a new sense of confidence and the support that's now invisibly present in her life, Amira takes a decisive step. She quits her previous odd jobs and devotes herself entirely to her studies. Design courses transform from a hobby into a goal. She stays late, mastering complex programs, and her projects, once timid, gain depth and boldness. Her teachers note her unexpected progress, and soon her portfolio, albeit small, attracts attention. She receives her first real job offer, not a full-time position, but a project at a small but ambitious design studio. This is her first professional contract. Min-jun watches this with quiet pride. His support is never intrusive. He doesn't buy her a studio or get her a job. Instead, when she's hunched over her laptop, he might quietly bring her a cup of tea. When she shares her doubts before an interview, he doesn't give ready-made answers, but asks questions, helping her find her own confidence. He's become the kind of reliable support she never dreamed of, a man who believes in her, perhaps even more than she does. And this faith, not expressed in grandiose words, but demonstrated in everyday attention, gives her wings. She builds her career herself, brick by brick, but with solid ground under her feet. Their relationship isn't a whirlwind romance. It develops slowly, like a strong tree, sending down ever-deep roots. They find joy in the simple things. In shared weekend breakfasts, when Amira makes an omelet and Min-jun, to her constant amazement, masterfully slices fruit into perfect wedges. In quiet evenings, when each is busy with their own tasks, she with her sketches on a tablet, he with documents, but their feet touching under a shared blanket, and that's enough. He opens up the world to her, and she gives him what was sorely lacking in his life. Simple human warmth, a home without calculation. In her presence, the tension that is second nature to him gradually fades. He learns to laugh louder, to truly rest, to appreciate moments of silence filled not with loneliness, but with intimacy. For he became Amira's safe haven. After all the storms of debt, fears for her mother, uncertainty about the future, with him she found peace. Not the peace of idleness, but a deep inner calm, knowing she is loved and respected for who she is, that behind her was not an abyss, but a strong, unshakable wall. And for Min-jun, a man whose life was a labyrinth of responsibility, obligations, and calculations, Amira became a quiet garden at the center of this labyrinth, a place where he could take off his armor and simply be. She, reliability and strength; he, sincerity and light. Their story began with a found wallet, but was built on something incomparably more valuable: mutual respect, patience, and a quiet, unshakable happiness that they finally found, becoming for each other that safe shore, a quiet haven after a long voyage. Amira's desk, in her new, small but private studio, she kept it with his silent approval, not as a symbol of money, but as a reminder of a turning point. Sometimes, opening the drawer for her stylus, her fingers would brush against the soft leather, and a faint smile would appear on her lips. It was a talisman now, not a source of anxiety. Her studio, rented in a bright loft in the creative district, was her pride and joy. The name A Design, Mas Omaisin, was modestly displayed on the door. She hadn't had many projects yet, but they were high quality and painstakingly crafted. Her first major commission was a redesign of the interior of a small coffee shop chain. The client, a young entrepreneur, was looking for warmth and individuality. Amira worked around the clock, and Min-jun, passing by her room in their shared house, they had moved 6 months ago to a spacious apartment with a studio for her, would see a light under the door. He never said, "Stop working," but he might place a plate of sliced fruit next to her, or, at a particularly late hour, silently place his hand on her shoulder. A silent question, "Is everything okay?" That was enough. His world, too, gradually changed with her presence. He still rose at 5 in the morning, held morning meetings via video conference, his calendar scheduled down to the minute. But Friday evenings and all Sundays were now firmly blocked off from that calendar. Friday was their night. No gadgets, no business talk. Sometimes they watched movies. Sometimes Amira taught him to play the board games she adored. And to his surprise, she even signed up for gardening classes and now terrorized their balcony with endless pots of herbs and flowers. She still called Min-jun by his first name and patronymic, with great respect, but her eyes no longer shone with gratitude, but with maternal tenderness. He, in turn, could listen for hours to her stories about Amira's school years, asking clarifying questions with the same seriousness with which he conducted business negotiations. One day, Min-jun invited Amira to an official reception, the opening of a cultural center his company had co-financed. It was her first foray into his ceremonial world. Amira was no less nervous than before that first trip to the tower. He sensed it. "It'll be boring there," he said, helping her fasten the tiny clasp on her dress. Dark green, simple, yet impeccably tailored. Lots of people in ties, talking about things they don't understand. "You'll make the evening better, just by being there." "What should I say if they ask what I do?" she asked, catching his reflection in the mirror. The truth that you're a designer, that you're working on a coffee shop project, that's more than enough. At the reception, she carried herself with the quiet dignity she'd always possessed, but now it was reinforced by an inner confidence. His acquaintances, influential men and elegant women, cast cautious, appraising glances at her, but when they spoke to her, they were met not with timidity, but with a calm, intelligent gaze and clear answers. She didn't try to appear as one of their own, and this, paradoxically, commanded respect. Min-jun didn't stray far from her, but he didn't hang on her arm either. He gave her space, and his pride in her was evident only in the way his hand tightened slightly around his glass when she wittily answered a tedious question about contemporary art from one of the critics. He saw how the world he'd long considered his own began to change slightly in her presence alone. She brought freshness and sincerity to it. Amira bumped into Leon by chance at an architectural exhibition. She was there for inspiration for a new assignment. He was standing next to a model of a modern residential complex. Seeing her, he froze at first, then smiled softly. "Amira, you look great." "Leon, hello. Is this your project?" She nodded at the model. "Partially. Teamwork." They talked for a few minutes easily, without tension. He told her that his firm had won several interesting tenders. She said that she had opened her own studio. There was not a drop of reproach or regret in his voice, only sincere joy for her success. As they said goodbye, he said, "He seems to make you happy. That's the main thing. Thank you, Leon, and all the best to you too." She left with a light heart. The past was closed with dignity and gratitude, leaving no heavy residue. That evening, while she and Min-jun were having dinner in the kitchen, he had learned to cook a few simple Korean dishes and was now tasting his soup with an air of importance. She told him about the meeting. He listened without interrupting, stirring his bowl with a spoon. "He's a worthy man," Min-jun stated after a pause. "A good architect. I've seen his latest work. You would have chosen him if it weren't for—" He didn't finish. "If it weren't for you," Amira finished for him, smiling. "But you showed up, and everything became different. Not better or worse. Different." He extended his hand across the table, and she placed hers in his. No more words were needed. The past was respected, the present was valued, and the future was built together. Their closeness grew not only in everyday comfort, but also in the ability to be a support in moments of quiet crises. There was a time in Amira's life when a project had reached a dead end. The client was being cranky, and she felt worthless as a specialist. She sat staring at the wall, on the verge of tears from frustration. Min-jun, returning, immediately understood. He didn't say, "Don't worry," or "Drop this nonsense." He simply sat down next to her, put his arm around her shoulders, and said, "Remember how you came into my office? With trembling hands, but your back was straight. You were stronger then than you thought. You're stronger now. You're just tired. Let's rest. Tomorrow, everything will look different." He took her out of town, to a small house by the lake that belonged to his family. They did nothing for 2 days, walked, were silent, looked at the water. And by the end of the second day, the solution to the project came naturally, clear and obvious. He gave her not an answer, but the space to find it to herself. He had his dark days too, periods when the weight of responsibility weighed unbearably, when he had to make decisions that affected the fates of many people, and these decisions weren't easy. He could withdraw, retreat into himself, become detached and cold. Before, he'd simply dove into work, drowning out everything else. Now he had her. Amira didn't pester him with questions. She was simply there. She could sit silently with him in his office, reading a book while he worked. She could bring him his favorite green tea, placing her hand on the back of his neck, feeling the tension resting like a slab of stone on his shoulders. Sometimes she would say, "Let's go outside, get some air," and they would walk, and she, holding his hand, led him not to the botanical garden, but simply through the night streets, where he could finally exhale. She became his anchor in the turbulent sea that was his life. They didn't say forever in grandiose terms. That forever was in the details. In the way he always placed her morning coffee cup with the handle facing left, because he knew she was left-handed. In the way she would, without being asked, put aside articles on modern architecture or new interior design books that might interest him. In the way he learned all the names of her houseplants and even learned how to water them without overwatering. In the way she, knowing his old shoulder injury, always discreetly placed the softest pillow on his side of the sofa. One day, while sorting through old things in his country house, Amira found an album of childhood photographs on a far shelf in the library. One of them showed a small, very serious Min-jun, about 10 years old, sitting alone in the huge, empty hall of a traditional house. He looked straight into the camera, and in his eyes, there was an unchildlike concentration and a deep, hidden sadness. She showed him the photo. He looked at it for a long time, silently. "I almost forgot I was like this," he said finally. "What were you like?" she asked softly. "Lonely," he answered honestly, without embellishment. "Very responsible, and very lonely." She took his hand and pressed it to her cheek. "You are not alone now." He hugged her, pressing his lips to her hair, and in that embrace there was more gratitude and a promise than in any vows. Their shared home became a reflection of their union. Not a palace, but a spacious, bright space, where the modern minimalism of his taste harmoniously blended with the warm, cozy details Amira brought, bright throws, her own paintings on the walls. She'd started drawing again for the soul, a collection of whimsical ceramic mugs brought back from various trips. The kitchen always smelled of his soup or her fresh-baked goods. The study contained 2 desks, one his, monolithic and austere, the other hers, slightly cluttered with fabric swatches, sketchbooks, and styli. The happiness they found was mature and conscious. It had survived the trials of mistrust, external circumstances, and internal demons. It wasn't blind or naive. They saw each other's flaws, her sometimes excessive anxiety, his tendency toward cold detachment under pressure. But they learned not to fight them, but to accept them as part of the whole, and to be the shore on which one could lean when that part made itself known. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was the story of 2 strong people who found in each other not a prince or a savior, but an ally, someone with whom they could be silent without feeling awkward, someone with whom they could share their darkest fears without fear of judgment, someone with whom silence became music, and an ordinary day a gift. One late evening, as a soft autumn rain fell outside, they sat on the wide windowsill, wrapped in a single blanket, looking out at the wet streets, lit by lanterns. Amira's head rested on his shoulder. "I never thought it was possible to just be," Minjun said quietly, his voice blending with the tapping of drops on the glass. "Without a goal, without a plan for tomorrow. Just be here and now, and that's more than enough." Amira smiled without opening her eyes. "This is our haven. Quiet. Ours." He hugged her tighter, and in his heart, which had been a fortress for so long, there finally reigned not a strategic peace, but a deep, warm, living silence, filled with the beating of 2 hearts that had finally found their one true rhythm. They no longer searched, they found. And in this finding, there was no end point, but an endless, peaceful journey together.